Hey everyone, Happy New Year. I'm Secular Spirit, and in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 toxic core teachings of Islam. So there's a lot of toxic ideas in Islam, and too many to count really, from the misogyny and homophobia to the bizarre commands and things like the Prophet Muhammad's marriage to a child, Aisha. So for this video, I'm not going to focus on these things. There's a lot of these matters that Muslims will say are misinterpreted or open to interpretation or aren't quote-unquote true Islam. So I want to talk about things that I believe are universally taught to the vast majority of most Muslims. I was taught this stuff when I was a kid growing up Muslim, and I think most Muslims have been taught these things, and I would say they are core tenets, core aspects of the religion. And the thing about these toxic teachings as well is that Muslims, like I used to be, are taught that they're good things. So what I'm going to do is show potentially the benefits or the reasons why Muslims like this stuff or why they believe it. And I'm also going to show their darker side and their toxic aspects. Number 1, Islam teaches us to devalue this life and to treat it secondary to the afterlife. Now, this idea that the afterlife is more important than this life here is going to be familiar to pretty much any Muslim. And it's something that's taught at a very young age, that this life, the one that we're experiencing right now, is temporary, fleeting, ephemeral, and it's really just a test for God to decide where to put us in the eternal afterlife, heaven or hell. And the Quran is filled with promises of rewards in heaven and the threats of punishment in hell. And Allah also warns us to not linger on the rewards and the bounties of this life here. In the Quran, Allah says, "Know well that the worldly life is but a play and an amusement, and a show of beauty, an exchange of boastful claims between you, and a competition of increase in riches and children. All this is like a rain, the growth of which attracts the farmers, then it withers, and you see it turning yellow, then it becomes straw. And in the hereafter," God can't forget to mention the punishments, of course, "there is a severe punishment for the disbelievers, and forgiveness from Allah, and Allah's pleasure for the believers and the righteous. The worldly life is nothing but a material of delusion." So it's pretty explicitly said here that don't think much of the things that you're pursuing in this life. They don't mean anything compared to the real life, which is the one that happens after death. And I'm going to talk about the possible repercussions of this belief in a second. So what Muslims will point out is that while Allah tells us that the eternal afterlife is of course much more important, that we shouldn't neglect this life right here. And that's also mentioned in the Quran. But the thing to remember here is that this life is only meant to not be neglected because it is the testing ground upon which Allah decides our fates in the eternal afterlife, which is also mentioned in the Quran. The Quran says, "The one who created death and life so that he may test you as to which of you is better in his deeds." Now here's the thing about this whole claim that there's this eternal afterlife, this ultimate abode, that there's this beautiful, wonderful paradise and a horrendous hell, and I'm going to talk about the punishments in that hell later on in this video. We don't really know that they exist. We don't really know that there is an afterlife. Throughout human history, there's been a lot of claims about there being an afterlife and a lot of descriptions about this afterlife, but we don't actually have any tangible good evidence for it. I'm not saying that there couldn't be an afterlife. What I'm saying is no one knows if there is an afterlife or not. If someone is claiming there is one, they don't really know. They're just saying that built on faith or following ancient traditions, ancient religions, or whatever. So what's the consequence of this belief in an eternal afterlife? We inevitably don't care as much about the things that happen to us in this world and the things that impact us and our loved ones as we would if we knew that once we died, then this is all there is. And think about that. That is a possibility. What if our lives are all that there is? What if the moment we die, that's it, we cease to exist? That would just elevate the importance and significance of everything we're doing and everything we're trying to accomplish in this world. I can't help but think of the relationships that break apart in this life and religious people thinking, well, I'll always be reunited with my relatives in the afterlife. Well, what if you don't? What if you lose your chance to speak with your sick father who passes away and then you never see him again? And beyond these very important personal things, think about the attitude that a lot of theists have about the problems in the world, whether it's climate change or conflict or whatever. What ends up happening is that many of them will say, well, this is God's will and it's all right because there's a paradise awaiting the believers. So in a way, a lot of believers, it's in their best interest for this life, this world to end, because then they'll just be ushered up to paradise faster. What a tragedy it would be if we deny ourselves of things in this life because Allah commands us not to do them, or because we think we'll have time to do them in paradise, or we think, well, they don't matter because we have the paradise to look forward to. And then we never do those things, and that's it. It's truly a tragedy if you think about it. When we treat this life as the only thing we know we have for sure, we're more motivated to do good things and help others and try to make this world a better place. When we believe in an afterlife that's more important than this one, we're just not as motivated. It's as simple as that. Number 2, Islam teaches us to prioritize Allah over our loved ones and even over ourselves. Now, this is something that's exemplified pretty well in the story of Ibrahim and his son Ismail. So this story is in the Quran, and it's a story that's also in the Bible in Genesis, I believe. In a nutshell, the story goes that Ibrahim is commanded by Allah to sacrifice his son Ismail. So Ibrahim, wanting to obey Allah's command, proceeds to go ahead and start doing this, and Ismail also, who wants to be a good, obedient servant of Allah, agrees to let his father kill him. The moment before Ibrahim is about to do it, and he is about to do it, Allah stops him and gives him an animal to sacrifice instead. What's the takeaway from this story? I think when I learned it as a kid, the takeaway was pretty obvious. Nothing in this life matters except Allah, basically doing what he wants so you can get into paradise and to be with him. Everything else is secondary, including your loved ones, including all your dreams and aspirations of this world, including even yourself. And what we have in this story is a really grotesque, extreme example of Ibrahim's faith in Allah. A true believer, Muslim is taught, will follow Allah's command without question because Allah is good, and anything he commands is then obviously also good. And what are the implications of the story that we see in our day-to-day lives? We'll just look around at all the religious families. This isn't necessarily just confined to Islam. So many families where parents will disown their own children because they come out, or because they say they no longer believe in Islam. And somehow even worse than that, think of the Muslim man who's attracted to other men, and think of the self-loathing and the agony and suffering about their own identity that they must go through because they want to obey Allah's command. Think about the agony of someone who's willing to destroy their own families and even who they are as individuals, their own identities, because it doesn't square with what Allah says is the correct thing to do. And then think about how that's probably happened to countless thousands, I don't know, even maybe millions of people over the centuries. It's so overwhelming to think about that and think about how it's continuing, and it's going to keep continuing. All because of this belief in this religion that supposedly brings peace and love. And it's also important to note that because these commands come from Allah, who's, perfect and can't make a mistake and is all good and all loving, then Muslims just become more entrenched in their beliefs and perceptions of certain things. Of course, because Allah commanded Ibrahim to do that to his own son, it's a good thing. What an abomination that would be if that command came from anything else. Number 3, Islam teaches us morality through the fear of eternal punishment. So I'm just going to bring up a couple examples of what the Quran says are going to be the punishments for disbelievers in hell. And this one here is my favorite. Those who have disbelieved in our verses, we shall certainly make them enter a fire. Whenever their skins are burnt out, we shall give them other skins in their place, so that they may taste the punishment. And in case we forgot, surely Allah is Almighty, All-Wise. And here's another one. Whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger and transgresses the limits set by Him, He shall admit him to the fire, where he will remain forever. For him there is a humiliating punishment. If you ever read the Quran, there's countless examples of things like that I just read. And I always wonder when Muslims say that the Quran is a beautiful book filled with poetry and peace and love and elegance and all that, do they just kind of skim over those parts or gloss over them? I'm never really sure. And of course, Allah dangles the eternal reward of paradise in front of us, keep in mind that these are places that we can't know exist for sure. We don't have any tangible evidence for them, but we just have to take it on faith that they're real. And what's the consequence of this belief? It's showing us that the creator of the universe doesn't trust us. He thinks that we're these terrible beings that are going to just be corrupted and, if left to our own devices, just succumb to evil. That's why he has to threaten us with an eternal punishment, because if he doesn't, threaten us with something so extreme and so barbaric, then obviously we're going to be led astray and do terrible things to each other and ourselves. And what a really dark, dim view of humanity that really is. And that's essentially what's so toxic about this. Islam teaches us to distrust each other and to distrust ourselves. That's why we have to be kept by this omnipotent policeman who's dangling an eternal punishment over our heads. And of course, because of this, a good thing isn't done for its own sake. A good thing is done to please Allah and to avoid punishment in hell. It's so absurd, and I'll use that word again, barbaric. Why can't something be good or bad based on our own experience as human beings, as these societies that have developed over thousands and thousands of years? If we take Allah's existence out of the equation and we don't really have good proof for Allah's existence, then that's all it is in the first place. It's just human beings coming up with ideas of what's good or bad based on past experience. Obviously, there is no universal consensus on a lot of things. There is on some things more so than others. But that's all we really have, and I think that idea makes Muslims uncomfortable. They want there to be some kind of objective arbiter who decides what's good and what's bad. But I think from what we know about the world and ourselves, we can see that the only thing that determines what's good or bad is us. It's subjective to us as human beings and our experiences. And is the alternative really better? This eternal policeman who's judging us, this being that's supposedly all good, but is also willing to send his creations to hell for eternity. This creator that keeps his subjects in line through fear of grotesque punishment. No thank you. And remember, this creator is punishing us for sins that he knows we're going to commit, and he also created us and created the conditions in which those sins were committed. Absurd. Number 4, Islam robs us of our agency and taking responsibility for our own lives as individuals and as a society. How Allah works in Muslim societies and in God and other religions as well is it's this thing that we hide under, this thing that we take comfort in when we don't understand what's happening to us, when we're experiencing, suffering and misery and just bad things. Allah is simply the answer to all of those big life questions and mysteries that we simply haven't been able to answer. Why does a newborn baby die after only being alive for 10 minutes? Because Allah wills it. Why did that earthquake just go ahead and kill tens of thousands of people? Because it's part of Allah's plan, and Allah is all loving and all good, so obviously those things happened for a good purpose. Now, Muslims will say what I'm saying is wrong, that obviously Allah tells us to take responsibility for our own lives. And in the Quran, it's written that whatever hardship befalls you is because of what your own hands have committed. And the Quran also says that a man shall not deserve but the reward of his own effort. And a lot of theists will mention some variation of the trapped on the roof of a house joke. And so that joke basically goes like someone is trapped in a flood on the roof of their house and they can't escape. And a boat comes by and they say, come on board. And the person says, no, I'm praying to God and God will save me. So the boat leaves and the same thing basically repeats with, I don't know, a helicopter and then a rescue plane, whatever. The essential thing remains the same. The person who's trapped on the roof of his house says, no, I don't need to be saved. Allah's going to save me, or God's going to save me. And then, of course, the person dies from starvation or whatever, and he ascends up to God in the afterlife, and the person says, why didn't you save me, God? And God just says, well, who do you think sent the frickin' boat and the plane and the helicopter? And so the essence of the story is that God helps those who help themselves. And that's where there's something that doesn't quite square up in this whole conception of our own agency and our free will when it comes to having this creator watching over us. So our fates are supposedly in our hands, but we also need to lean on God and his will for everything. I mean, nothing happens without God's will. So which one is it? Do we do those things, or does Allah will it and allow it to happen? It seems to be this weird cryptic combination of both. And in the Quran, it's written that you will not so wish unless Allah so wills. So while we seem like we're doing things and we have the freedom to do them, we're also chained to this plan of Allah, which Muslims will say, well, it factors in our free will choices, but can we really do something if Allah hasn't already willed it? So what Islam teaches is that we have control over our own fates, but we are also helpless and beholden to the will of Allah, and we have to follow all His rules. So I think what happens because of this, that people inevitably just lean on God for everything. Anything that bewilders them, anything that confuses them, anything that causes them fear. And while that can be comforting, it also takes away our own agency for, taking charge of our lives and fixing our own problems. When we don't believe that there's a God who's going to make things better, or who's going to just, rectify everything in the afterlife, all the injustices that we're experiencing right now are going to be rectified. If we take away those things, then we'll realize that there's a lot of things that happen in this world that are out of our control, and the best we can do is just manage as well as we can. And I think there truly is something self-empowering about that, to not lean on a God, to just lean on ourselves as individuals and on our fellow human beings, and just think about all the things we've accomplished as a species. To just credit the good things to Allah is taking away from what we've done. We've done it ourselves, including creating Allah. There's this weird thing that goes on with credit to Allah, and it's something that's always bugged me, and it bugged me even when I was a Muslim, whenever I'd hear someone say, inshallah. So, inshallah, this thing will happen, inshallah, we'll do this or do that, and inshallah, which means God willing, is just saying that who knows how things will turn out. Hopefully it does, if Allah wills it. And what ends up happening is that when a good thing happens, the credit goes to Allah. When a bad thing happens, well, that was our own fault, or the bad thing happened because a better thing is going to come out of it in Allah's plan. Our failures are okay because it's part of Allah's plan. Our successes only happened because Allah permitted them. How can that not be crushing to our own self-empowerment? And number 5, the final toxic core teaching of Islam is that Islam teaches us to rely on blind faith. In many aspects of what Islam promises us, and in many of its explanations for life's big mysteries, we're taught to just lean on faith that Allah knows best and that Allah's explanations that are in the Quran are true. And just to expand on this a little bit further, not only is the Muslim believing that Allah is real, the Muslim is also believing that Allah is good, that Allah cares about us, that Allah has our best interests at heart. There's a reason why major religions split up on all these different sects that disagree on all sorts of different things. It's because we don't really have any tangible evidence for the truth of the claims of those religions. All we have are just interpretations of ancient texts, or just the whims of different collections or different individuals of people over the centuries. They decide things that they believe are beneficial to them, and they'll discard things that they think are not beneficial. And there's going to be all sorts of disagreements about that kind of stuff because we all have different subjective experiences as human beings. Now, if we could rely on something more tangible, something that is more evidence-based, I don't think we would have as many disagreements. Obviously, we humans are capable of disagreeing about everything, but when you look at something like the field of medicine, you can see that there's universal agreements on what to do to treat certain conditions, and that has led to the eradication of certain diseases. The reasons those achievements happened is because we had evidence that we could objectively analyze and determine. And for some reason, this whole requirement of faith in Allah without evidence is so important. Throughout the Quran, Allah promises us the rewards and riches of paradise. And at the same time, He threatens us with hell, like we've discussed already. But He does this without giving us any tangible evidence of His existence, the existence of the hereafter, the existence of heaven or hell or the jinn or the angels, whatever you want to call them. So why doesn't Allah directly reveal Himself in a way in which everyone will understand that He must be real and that they will have no doubt in His existence? In the Quran, it's written that it is not possible for a human being that Allah speaks to him except by way of revelation or from behind the curtain, or that He sends a messenger and He reveals with His permission what He wills. So why is Allah putting this restriction on Himself? Or this restriction on us, I suppose? I suppose Allah can't make it too easy when our fate in the eternal afterlife is at stake for the beings that He supposedly loves. So why does Allah test us? Well, we really don't know. Some theorize that Allah just likes to be worshipped, or that these tests are for our own good and that we'll understand the plan one day. But what is the key thing here is that we got to take it on faith that these things are for our own benefit, let alone that they actually exist. But at the same time, when you talk to Muslims, very few of them will say that they believe because they know Islam is true, which is essentially just saying, I believe because I believe. They'll always offer evidence or proofs that justify their beliefs. And I think this comes out of this insecurity, because of this inner realization that they know that there isn't much of a strong footing to build their beliefs upon, that their blind faith isn't really enough. So they grasp for any kind of evidence that they can. And that's why the evidence that Muslims present is often so weird or abstract, or just has a lot of these leaps to conclusions and all these assumptions. You'll hear about numerical miracles in the Quran, or vague prophecies in the Quran that have been generously interpreted. And then of course you'll have the Muslims who'll say things like, well, something can't come from nothing, or that life is meaningless without God. And especially those last couple of things, which are more philosophical stuff, they don't prove Allah. They borderline don't even prove that there is a creator God. And it's in talking to Muslims on social media that I've discovered the danger of this blind faith. What Muslims are doing when they're presenting evidence, like the ones I just mentioned, they're not looking at it through a proper, rigorous process of looking at these different pieces and following them to their logical conclusion. They're starting with this belief, this blind faith that Islam has to be true, and then they're just trying to find things to inevitably justify that belief. They can't come to the conclusion that, well, I don't know if Allah is real or not. It always has to be that Allah is real, and so they'll just contort and twist things to make it fit that. And when you do that for the most important thing in your life, this religion that teaches you the meaning of life and how you should conduct yourself and what happens to us all after death, think about what it does to your critical thinking in other aspects of your life. And this is the problem with faith. You can justify anything on faith, and that's really scary, because I think that blind faith in one thing, especially something as important as Islam, could lead to blind faith in other things for bad, unjustified reasons. In this era of fake news and polarized beliefs about almost everything under the sun, we need more critical thinking, not less of it. We need more objective, evidence-based discussion, not blind faith that we can't argue with, because people will just say, well, I believe it because I believe it, or I believe it because this vague interpretation of this ancient text says this is true. And that's what blind faith does. It closes people off so that they're blind to anything but their faith. So there you have it. Those are my 5 toxic teachings of Islam. And there's probably more that I could talk about, but I decided to just focus on these 5 because I truly think they are universal to the vast majority of Muslims. Let me know what you think about them in the comments, and I'll be coming out with another video soon.